Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Wine, Women, and Words. And with me, of course, as always, is Michelle.
Hello.
And joining us tonight is our special guest, RD Kardon, also known as Robin. And we're here at, Emma Klutz. And we're here to talk about her book, Flygirl. So thank you so much, Robin, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to meet you and your pets and talk a little bit about books.
Yes, and what's everybody drinking tonight? We got to do our round robin. We can't forget that. Guess first.
I've got a Cab Sauv.
Oh, lovely.
I'm starting to scrape the bottom of my wine barrel, so to speak. I don't actually have a barrel, but I need to re-up. But I'm having a Moscato tonight, even though it's definitely not a Moscato night. I need something different, but it's a Moscato.
When is it ever good to have a Moscato?
Moscatos are the only wines that Rich will drink, so we always try to have one of them, at least one of them, in the wine fridge. But I really wanted a red, and I don't have a red, so Moscato is.
Well, I'm drinking Cabernet as well. It's the Pacificana from Wink. And if you guys want to give Wink a try, go to trywink.com/www podcast, and you can get $22 off your first order of wine.
Yay! Yes, I need to. I'm waiting for payday so I can order my next box. I need to re-up my stash.
It's always nice to have a stash of wine.
Yes.
Wine and books.
Yes. I mean, you can't have one without the other, really, when it comes down to it. It'd just be a travesty. So let's dive into your book, Robin. Now, for those who are not familiar with the book, tell us a bit about it.
Flygirl is my debut novel, and my goal was to give the reader a realistic peek into what it was like to be a female pilot in the late 90s and take them into the cockpit of a jet through the eyes of a female pilot. There were lots of challenges that women in the industry faced during that time, and I wanted to share those. And also to introduce readers to this character, this ambitious and smart and savvy and imperfect person who was motivated by all the things that, motivate us: love, guilt, ambition, passion, vulnerability. And that's really what the book is about. The book is about someone who wants something and tries to get it, and the people that stand in her way.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's in a lot of ways, very technical. There's a lot of, airplane flying lingo that, it's not above a reader's head, because I know nothing about this stuff, but it's, you could tell that you learned about this. Can you tell us about what went into the research for this?
I was a professional pilot for 12 years.
Well, there you go.
Wow.
So that was the research. We worked very hard, my team and I, to make sure that I didn't talk down to the reader, because I definitely would not want to do that. But I didn't make it so technical that people would roll their eyes and walk away. And so far, from what I'm hearing and what you just said, it definitely was technical, but it wasn't beyond the understanding, of someone who would read a book.
I think that's, especially when you're speaking from personal experience about a particular topic. You may be an expert on it, but you have to convey it in a way that someone who is just picking it up for the first time can still understand it. I feel like there's a very fine line of translating what you know into something that's understandable.
Yeah, like I said, we worked really hard on it. It was easy for me, when someone would say, "Well, I don't really understand this," and I would respond and say, "Oh, well, it's just this, 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 and this." But you have to put yourself. It was so important, this whole process, and again, being my debut novel, the key, it was really all about, at the end of the day, it was about my readers, and who my readers would be, and engaging them and not making them want to walk away from the book. So it was priority one to make sure that it was realistic, but not so overly technical that the reader would just put it down and walk away. Because that, honestly, if it was the topic that I didn't understand and that was too technical and that assumed that I had knowledge that I didn't have, I would put a book down and walk away.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I mean, I could say that for myself when it comes to some science fiction, where I'm just like, what? I gotta actually know how this stuff works. I
Yeah. Do you read a lot of science fiction?
No.
Yeah, I don't either. And I feel terrible that I don't read it because it's super popular.
There's some, there is good science fiction out there. I can get into some steampunk. And for me, for the science fiction, to read it, it has to be a bit more on the fantasy side of things as opposed to the scientific, technical side. But I always find it really funny where it's science fiction to me feels like the mansplaining of genres. Every time, ever since, as long as I can remember, almost every guy that I've known has said, you've got to read science fiction. Now, I like to watch science fiction. I love watching science fiction. I love watching Star Wars. I love, all the sci-fi movies. I like to watch it. I don't like to read it.
Yeah.
And to the point where I did this thing on Twitter about maybe 6 months to about a year ago, actually, I would come to think of it. And I couldn't decide on what to listen to next on Audible. And I gave a list of 3 different books. This is what I'm thinking about. I can't decide between these 3. All 3 historical fiction. And Audible retweeted it. And then afterwards, what proceeded after that in the conversation were, I kid you not, a bunch of guys recommending sci-fi to me.
Right.
Almost every single one was like, you should read this science fiction. You should read this science fiction. Don't read those. Read Dune. I've heard of Dune. I'm not reading Dune.
No, I'm not reading Dune.
If I'm putting in options like the Underground Railroad, do you really think Dune is going to be the kind of book that I want to read? Not really.
No, I'm definitely with you on that. I never developed a taste for it. It's hard for me to follow it. And I have a technical background. And it's just not interesting to me. I want to read a story about people and situations, and I want to write stories about people and situations, and that's just the way it goes,
So, and with your book, one of the questions that I was going to ask, although you've technically answered it for me already, was there are a lot of professions, that were and still are male dominated, and I was really interested in why you selected this particular one, which obviously if you worked in it, then you're coming from your own writing what you know, basically. Are some of the challenges that Tris faces in her novel, in her story, based on or inspired by some things that you went through when you were a pilot?
Yes, definitely. Inspired by events that took place during my career and my friends. And that's one of the reasons it's not a memoir, is I didn't want to draw only on my own experiences. I wanted to draw on experiences of other women that came up around the time that I did. We started seeing some things in the workplace that, were a little odd, that were, just not consistent with the job that we were hired to do. And I think it's important to know that 20 years after, the time this book takes place, I think women in aviation are still struggling with a lot of those issues. If there's been improvement, there hasn't been a whole lot. Isn't that awful?
It is. I mean, it goes to show that, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
Right. The Me Too movement gave a voice to people in the entertainment industry. And it makes sense if you think about it, because there are some uber powerful women in entertainment. I mean, hello, Oprah. So, you know, it is not surprising that that is the first industry where women have decided that they can feel comfortable speaking about some of the things that have happened to them. But that hasn't filtered down to a lot of other male-dominated industries. Like, I have a lot of friends who are still in law, which is where I started, friends who are in the financial services industry. I belong to an organization called Women in Aviation International, which is the largest worldwide organization of its kind. And just about 3 months ago, I got a confidential survey from them asking to describe harassment in the workplace. Wow. Just getting to that.
You know, yeah, I feel like a lot of that is starting to trickle down into the other fields and the other fields, other career things. Because I mean, you don't only have the entertainment industry. We have sports, the whole Larry Nassar thing with the Michigan, all of that.
You're correct.
Yeah, more of it's coming in, and I think you see more of it in the entertainment industry, not only because they're more powerful, because there's also that wealth disparity. You have a lot more wealthy women who are able to stand up now and say, hey, this happened to me, because they don't have a fear of retribution. You have a fear of retribution, people taking away your livelihood, and if you're a single parent, you don't really have many options.
No, I completely agree. And that was, you know, when I do readings, and I do quite a few, the passage I always read is from the chapter where Tris wants to tell somebody what happened to her. And her best friend tells her not to do it because she'll get a reputation and it'll follow her for the rest of her career. And that was true back then. And, you know, just like you said, Diana, she was not someone who, you know, had a tremendous amount of wealth and could weather the storm, you know, if it blew back on her. Tough choice. Tough choice to have to make. And it's a tough choice for any person, any marginalized person, women, you know, people of color, anyone, you know, who has a physical attribute that sets them apart. It's always going to be hard.
And at what point did you decide that you wanted to share these stories through the eyes of your character? Was this always kind of in the back of your mind that it would make a good story, or were you able to step back from it and look back and say, this is a story that I probably should tell?
I started writing this book 25 years ago. In fact, with one exception, and that's the main character, I started writing it. I wrote about 83 pages in a word processing program called WordPerfect that doesn't even exist anymore.
WordPerfect still exists.
Oh, does it?
It does, yeah.
Shocking.
It does. I use it in my law firm. It exists.
Oh my goodness!
Law offices are keeping it alive.
Oh my goodness! This is actually pretty good news. But yeah, you know, I typed it out. I gave all the characters names. All the same characters are still in the book. They all have the same exact name that I picked 25 years ago. Except the main character, I changed her name, and I took those pages when I got serious about finishing the novel, which was 4 years ago. I had carried around those pages that I had printed. I carried them around in a manila folder that said book, and everywhere I lived, in every city I moved to, I carried that folder around. And 4 years ago, I said, you know, time to finish it, because I'm a finisher. It may take me a really long time. And most of the scenes that were in that draft are still in the book.
Oh, how fascinating. So now, as you mentioned, you're a pilot, or were a pilot. Out of curiosity, what is the biggest plane you've ever flown?
737-800.
Okay. And that's... the scale-wise, I know some planes, a little bit about airplanes. What's the...
Have you ever flown on Southwest Airlines?
No, I have not, actually.
Okay. 737, interestingly enough, is probably the smallest jet that Boeing makes. It's a Boeing jet. And it is the only plane that Southwest Airlines flies.
Mm-hmm.
And every airline has it because it's incredibly economical.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, fuel efficient. That's the key, because the single biggest expense in putting an airplane in the air is gas.
Mm-hmm.
And so the less gas an airplane burns, the more cost effective it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great, what we would call short haul, which means, it'll go from New York to California, but it won't go to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
It won't go that far. So that's what I flew. I flew for airline out of Chicago, the 737.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
My neck of the woods.
Yes. I lived in Chicago for 22 years. And I'm from New York originally. So, Michelle, are you from Chicago, or are you there now?
We're here right now. Originally, I'm from New Jersey.
Oh, from Jersey. Whereabouts?
Bergen County. So just 45 minutes outside of the city.
Yep, know it well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're both in LA now, right?
Diane is. I'm in Chicago now. So.
Oh, where in Chicago do you live?
I'm maybe half an hour north. I'm near the naval base in Great Lakes.
Cool. Know it well. I did a lot of my flight training when I was becoming a pilot at Palwaukee Airport in Palatine.
Oh, okay. Words that are familiar to me. It's very exciting.
I'm trying really hard.
But what I love, when you say you started writing this book 25 years ago, yeah. I think that's so wonderful, because when you're reading about, something that happened 20 years ago, it's not something that you're remembering, and you're writing it from a present day, state of mind and setting. They're actually, experiences and stories that were from that time, which I think probably, writing about the memory of something and translating that into a fictional story and writing from an actual present day experience are probably two very different things when you're sitting down to write about it.
I think you're absolutely right about that. And I was grateful that I had put down those pages back when I did, because when I went through them and started, revising them and turning them into the book, I definitely recreated the feeling that I had in situations that were similar to my main character. And that was the important thing. What happens, the facts, they're interesting, but what is particularly interesting to the reader, or at least to me as a reader, is how does the character feel about it? How do they handle it? How does that change their world? Mm-hmm. And believe me, it was very easy to remember it reading those pages.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, just when you sat down to actually, finish it and start wrapping it up, I'm sure just rereading everything was kind of like going back and reliving some of those memories or some of those experiences.
Yeah, that was maybe the less fun part. But it was important. It had to be done. Authenticity was like the most important thing to me. Mm-hmm. And it's only been out literally less than 3 weeks. Tomorrow it'll be 3 weeks.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, brand new. So
brand new.
Weeks. Yeah.
The few reviews that are starting to come in, although they're actually more than a few. They touch on a lot of different things, but almost everyone in some way uses the word realistic or authentic, or it's a real story. And I can't tell you, I mean, there's nothing you could say that makes me happier. So that is nice. That is nice to know the hard work, maybe it paid off.
Mm-hmm. And that's an important thing about, one great thing to touch on with fiction. Just because it's fiction doesn't mean it has to be inauthentic.
I agree. And one of my favorite books is a book by the name of Gillian Flynn called Gone Girl. Mm-hmm. And it was incredibly well written. A story the like of which I'd never read before, and I doubt ever to read again. And that was the one thing that sticks in my craw about the book, is it was so unbelievable, but so unbelievable that there would be two people like that would do the things that they did, that would go to the lengths to make the point that they were making, and brilliant and creative and unique, but not super realistic. At least not me.
I remember reading that book, and when it's, you got the big plot twist about halfway through, one of the big plot twists halfway through, and you go from feeling such great sympathy for
him
to, oh my God, this woman is crazy. Like,
yeah, he's as nutty as she is. They're nuttier than creatures. I mean, it was a brilliant book. I mean, I'm sure there's a little bit of jealousy in this as well, because it was just brilliant and brilliantly executed. But you could never call it realistic, I don't think. I mean, and if those people are out there, I hope they don't come anywhere near me.
Stay over there.
Stay over there.
Yeah, I think there are definitely some books that you read as a writer and go, why couldn't I have come up with something like that?
Well, that's basically, I'm sorry, Michelle, that's basically every book. I don't, when you're writing your own stuff, you're thinking, at least me, because I'm such a perfectionist, I guess, maybe a lot of writers are, it never seems original enough. It never seems creative enough. And I had an experience a couple weeks ago. The book is being made into an audiobook. And I was listening to the woman who's recording it, who is superb. I'm so lucky to have found her. And I'm listening to her read the book, and it sounded like a completely new book. And I'm walking down the street with my headsets on going, who wrote this? Oh, wait. That's me. I mean, it's just, so I was feeling, you can't judge your own work, but it was.
You're always your own worst critic.
Oh,
absolutely.
Oh my goodness. Thank God I don't have to write a review of my book.
It would come down to, I mean, at least I know for me, and Diana, I know, is just as hard on herself as I am on myself.
Sometimes harder, I think. Sometimes I think I'm harder on myself than you are on yourself. You've heard some of my temper tantrum tirades.
If we had to write reviews of our own work, it would be like page 72, paragraph 6, line 7.
What the hell was I thinking?
Yeah, right. What was I thinking when I wrote that? And then you get to the certain point where the book is done, and you're staring at it, and you're like, why did I use that word? I should use this word, or I should put this sentence before this sentence. And then some kind editor has just got to tell you to stop. Just stop. Stop doing it. Stop editing. Just
put the computer down.
Put it down. Walk away. And it is really hard to do. When you're like that, it is. And I've been like that my whole life in business. If I wrote an email, or I sent a document, or I wrote, when I was practicing law, if I wrote a brief, I'd be out the door, and I would be having nightmares about, I should have made this point. I should have done that. I don't know what that says about me. I think we need a professional to assess that. That's the way it goes.
So now you mentioned you practiced law. Did you go from being a lawyer to flying planes? Wow. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I did. Oh God, I hated practicing law. Oh.
I hear you on that.
Yeah. Are you an attorney, Diana?
I'm a paralegal.
Oh, well, then I mean,
yeah.
9 out of 10 attorneys don't even like their jobs, and I was definitely part of the 9. And I was looking for something else to do. And I had started a new job, and I asked a client, I was schmoozing, trying to get business, and asked him what he did in his spare time. And he said he was a private pilot. I said, wow, that's so exciting. I've always wanted to try that. And he said, well, call my son. He's a flight instructor. And that's how it started.
Oh, wow. And you found the passion in that. That's great. That's fantastic. Yeah, I don't know a lot of attorneys who are in love with their job. I think the paralegals that I know are happier with their job than the attorneys are.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, especially because at 5 o'clock we get to walk away. They don't get to walk away.
You don't get to walk away. It's always there.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was a litigator, which means my job was to make sure nobody was ever happy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they weren't. People arguing at you all the time. After a certain point, when you fly a plane, you're sitting up in the cockpit, you're flying around, you've got beautiful scenery, and nobody really bothers you all that much.
Like no one can get to you.
Well, not anymore. I did most of my flying before 9/11.
Okay.
And before then, we would keep the cockpit door open. The flight attendants would be in and out. We could have passengers come up during the flight.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid. I used to fly because I'm originally from the East Coast too. East Coast girls. I would fly from New York to California to visit my dad. And I would get visits up in the cockpit. I get to see what the cockpit looked like. I remember one time where the pilots got me laughing because there were buttons that made different noises.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So they were like, here, we can make it sound like a rooster in here. And it was just so cool as a kid. It was neat. But yeah, I don't think they can do that anymore at all.
No, one of my favorite stories. That's a great story. One of my favorite stories was the very first time I sat in the jump seat, because when you're an airline pilot, you can actually fly for free, right? But you have to ride up in the cockpit on the jump seat.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the two pilots. It was a Southwest Airlines flight, and the two pilots were pretending to be Wayne and Garth from Wayne's World. And they one put on a blonde wig and one put on a dark wig, and all the way down to the runway, they talk like Wayne and Garth, and it was absolutely hysterical. And then they pulled into the ramp and pulled up to the gate, took the wigs off, stood up there at the cockpit, waved to the passengers, and I'm like, man, who would ever believe this?
I mean, I don't know how comfortable I would be if Wayne and Garth were my pilots. If they were doing that during the flight, I would feel like it would be like Airplane, like the movie Airplane.
Well, and luckily, none of the passengers could see it. So, to me, as another pilot, I'm really not paying attention to that. I'm making sure, is this happening on time?
Mm-hmm.
Is this going down when it's supposed to? Is the gear down? That's really important. And if everything's going normally, I'm just sipping my coffee, sitting there. Pretty funny stuff. Yeah, there's so many stories like that. We could. When pilots get together, they immediately start telling them. It's like, the crusty old guys and people like me. And I am a crusty old guy too. Guy is a unisex term. So
you know what? I use guys as a unisex term too. It's a California thing.
Yeah.
Or guy and dude are unisex in California lingo. So I will say dude. I'll say dude for things that are really cool.
Yeah.
It's an exclamation.
It is. It really is. I mean, I don't know how many times Michelle has texted me a cover of a book, and my response has been, dude.
Dude.
Yeah, it's all about the inflection in your voice.
Exactly.
And Diana, you definitely have the California inflection. How long have you been out here?
Oh gosh, 20 years actually. Just over 20 years, going on 21 years. I've been living outside. I did a brief stint in Texas where I was exiled for a few years.
That's a perfect way to describe living in Texas.
For a California girl, yes. I was always meant to be in California.
I apologize.
But yeah, I've been living outside of New York longer than I actually lived in New York officially this year, which I think is really freaking cool.
Well, I love being born and raised there. I went to college at NYU, and I really love that, being down at Washington Square and Greenwich Village. I do believe that New York is the greatest place in the world to be from. And I would not ever live there again. No interest.
New York City is great. I want to go back. I haven't been back since I was a teenager.
Right.
Though I love my family in upstate New York. And I have some friends still in upstate New York, Utica area.
Oh, Utica, of course.
Yep. I love them to death, but I'm not going to go back. It's too cold. It's too wet. It's
very snowy.
Yeah. I mean, when it snows, like what, 10 months out of the year?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we shouldn't talk about snow while we're talking to Michelle.
I was just going to say,
I lived in Chicago 22 years, so I have seen my share.
I don't think the Chicago snow is as bad as the New York snow.
We just got like 6 inches last night, so.
Oh, did you?
Well, I don't know, maybe not that much. We got a lot. It's been this past weekend we got a storm, and then Monday I think it snowed, and we woke up this morning and we had a lot of snow. It's right when we said it last week. I apologize to all of Chicagoland because I jinxed us.
I told you so. I told you.
When I had the audacity to say out loud, I think we're gonna have a mild winter.
Oh no.
And basically, I'm not allowed to talk about weather ever again.
No, you're not.
Well, we'll move off that topic.
But we are at our half hour now.
Oh, that went really fast.
It does. Time flies when you're drinking wine.
So fun to talk to you guys.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Well, it was really, really fun, and I've been looking forward to it for a while. I really enjoy your podcasts.
Oh, thank you.
I've listened to them all.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
You're welcome, because I really, really like them. And this is all, debut novel, all new to me. So I'm always really grateful when anyone decides to spend time with me in my book.
Yes, and tell us where everybody can pick up your copies of your book, Flygirl.
You can get Flygirl wherever books are sold.
Okay.
You can go to your indie bookstore and order it. It's just hitting the shelves in the bookstores down here in San Diego.
Okay.
It's available online on any of the vendors. So I hope you do decide to read it. And if you do read it, I hope you enjoy it. And I'd love to hear about that. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I will say, Michelle, stay warm. And I will say, Diana, cheers to you.
And cheers to you. Thanks, guys, and have a good night.
Have a good night. Bye-bye now.
Bye.